So tonight we are going to talk, well, I'm going to talk, and then we're all going to talk together about right mindfulness, which is the seventh branch or limb, and the Takavaga, the Noble Eightfold Path, whatever we want to call it. So we will spend quite a bit of time talking about the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the one that most people land on when they think about right mindfulness, but we're going to start somewhere else. Sri Ramana Maharshi said, well, his admonition was, never forget who you really are. Never forget who you really are. That is the essence of right mindfulness. Who are you? Who is each of us really? And it's not what we think we are. Nisargadatta said that his teacher had told him, "You are not who you think you are." And Nisargadatta said, and I believed him. And look what a difference 3 years makes. So never forget who you really are. You really are life. You really are love. You really are the universe. Never forget who you really are. So our right mindfulness is all about pointing us to that direct experience, 24/7 by 365. And there is a popular modern view of right mindfulness, which is along the lines of right mindfulness, it's bare awareness, naked attention. It's just being present without judging, without categorizing. I want to talk about that for a little bit, because that is completely at odds with the structure of right mindfulness that's described in the Pali Canon, which is recognizing the intersection of mindfulness with effort, with concentration, looking at ways of applying mindfulness to the body, and so forth. So this naked awareness is completely at odds with that. And I happen to think it's very dangerous, and a lot of the time just flat out misguided. So first off, what is bare attention? Well, bare attention is attention without any fabrication at all. I'm looking around here. If I see Elizabeth, for example, Elizabeth. Well, it's not just Elizabeth, it's Elizabeth. There's a whole history of ideas and relationship and story that is involved in that. To say that's just bare attention is nonsense. It's self-deluding. And we can say, oh, well, that's okay, because actually what we're talking about is the ultimate, you've got to do all this stuff first, but it's really what, no, because the transcendent, or the final mindfulness we've been talking about, mundane, transcendent, and then final is the stages, right? So the final right mindfulness is letting go of mindfulness itself. It's incomprehensible from where we are, from the realm in which we're having, and the context within which we're having this conversation. So to say, well, that's bare attention, is also clearly not right, because you can't use the same label. I mean, it just doesn't translate. It gets into the same space to me as there are people who will show up and, loving kindness and whatever. It's like self-directed metta. So love myself just the way I am. It comes from a really wonderful place, and I can see some beauty in that message. But again, it can be really misguided and unhelpful, because I really love being 200-pound overweight and a chronic overeater. I really love the fact that I can't stop myself from going out and going to pawn shops or going and shooting people. I love myself. No, that's not okay. You don't have to judge yourself as a bad person because you aren't those actions. But to say it's okay to just bring bare awareness to that, it's just not right, because you've got work to do there. There is work to be done on those behaviors. So I think that whole idea of just bare attention comes from some misunderstandings. It comes from some idealizations, and it's rather dangerous, and I think at times quite harmful. So what we're going to do here, we're going back to the book, and I'm going to go to, there's a sutra which is, for those interested, it is Samyutta Nikaya 45.8. And it's actually the one you used the other day. It's one of my favorites. And in this one, it basically defines what each of the steps of the Noble Eightfold Path is. And there is a formula here, which is the definition of right mindfulness. And it is a formula which shows up in several other places, and we'll skip and see it in some of those places too. But just so we go through, and it's, for instance, what is right view? Knowledge with regard to stress, the origination of, cessation of, the way to practice leading to cessation of stress. This is called right view. What is right resolve? Resolve for renunciation, non-ill will, for harmfulness. This is right resolve, and so on. So you can see the way this one flows. When it gets to mindfulness, what is right mindfulness? There is a case where, and there are 3 separate clauses here which we'll pull out. There is a case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, feelings in and of themselves, mind in and of themselves, and dharmas in and of themselves. So it remains focused on the frame of reference in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful. That's the second. Subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. Focused on, ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with regard to the world. So we'll talk about what each of those 3 mean. We will first skip to page 363 in this fat tome. Page 363. He does this in the context of talking about something we'll come back to, which is phenomenon of origination, phenomenon of passing away, as being places we apply mindfulness. But it's exactly the same formula. 367. So yes, so this is the Anapanasati Sutta, right? Which is the 16 steps, 4 tetrads, mindfulness of breathing, breathing in, breathing out, aware of the body, calming the body is the first tetrad, and so forth. In the middle of this, or right at the beginning, on that occasion, so you go through the 4 steps of breathing. I will breathe in, I'll breathe out, calming bodily fabrication, which is the 4th step. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with regard to the world. Exactly the same formula. And I think my next reference is to the Satipatthana. It is. Next reference is to the Satipatthana, and it's exactly the same formula in there. So these are all different places where Buddha talks about mindfulness. He uses the same formula. So the formula again, and we'll talk through each of the steps. Focused on the body. Actually, before I go, no, we'll go there first, since I said we'd go there. So the body in and of itself, focused on the body, in the body, feelings in the feelings. You hear that, it's like, what on earth is that talking about? It's something that doesn't translate well to English. Those of you who have bumped into Latin at any time in your past, which I've never done any study of Latin, but I know the tenses are really, the cases are really complicated. There's like 6 cases or something. One of the cases is the locative case, which is a case denoting location. That's all this is. They're trying to translate a locative case description. So it's saying, place your attention at a place, put your attention in a place, and then be mindful of something in that place. So the on, in, around, just think of mindful of the body, in the body, or on the body, or from the body, or at the body. There is nothing but the body. This is mindfulness of the body without worrying about the outside world, either as a subject of extending mindfulness or as an influence in the field of mindfulness. So it's really just, there is just the body. So and focus, this ties it in with concentration. And if you remember back one of the sutras we talked about early on, where these three go around, it's Majjhima Nikaya 117, but these three go around, effort, view, effort, and mindfulness. These three go around. So this ties it in with concentration. Concentration has the phrase ikagata, which is often translated as single-pointed, but that's a misleading and I think an inaccurate translation, because it means you're pointed on a single thing. But it's not this needlepoint focus. It's Tanisaro, who is this author and one of my favorites, he talks about having themes of concentration and themes of mindfulness. So your theme in this aware of the body, mindful of the body and the body, the theme is the body. You could have as a theme of concentration, mindfulness. You could have as a theme of mindfulness, breathing. That is the idea behind this ikagata, this single theme direction of concentration. So it's being able to bring your concentration in, not to a single point, but to harness that concentration and avoid distraction. So this focus on theme is about bringing that ikagata, that concentration, into our mindfulness. Ardent, alert, and aware. Ardent, it's right effort. That's all that means. It's an A word rather than an E word, but it basically means right effort. And so again, it's just bringing these together. We've got to be cultivating skillful attributes, mindfulness, behaviors, and reducing unskillful ones. That's all ardent means. Alert is actually paying attention. So our posture when we sit, it is intentionally a posture of alertness. And in the Zen tradition, the most recurring instruction is check your posture. When you're getting distracted, check your posture, because you're supposed to be upright and alert. You sit in full lotus so you can't move. So if there's a tiger coming up towards you, you're kind of screwed. But you're alert, so you see it happening. It's this, you're trying to get to this posture of all sensory inputs are reduced dramatically, but you are alert, so you're really noticing what is actually going on in this quiet place. Ardent, alert, and mindful, or aware. The word that's translated for mindfulness is kind of it's interesting. This guy by the name of Rhys Davids, who I think he's like in the 1920s or something. It was 100 years ago. It's a while ago. Yeah. He was a Brit, and a lot of the early Western discoverers of Eastern faiths were Brits, because they were wandering all over their colonies and noticing how the locals weren't looking after the assets properly and bringing back the assets and sticking them in our museums and selling them to each other. But Rhys Davids, he went around and he came across some of these texts, and when he was translating them, this word mindfulness, smriti, he didn't know what to do with that. And so he took it back to his context, which was Christianity, and the Anglican Book of Prayer. And at the end of towards the end of the Anglican Book of Prayer is a verse that talks about being mindful of the needs of others. And that, I believe, is why this was translated to mindful, because it is saying, well, what this is asking us to be is to behave in a way that is similar to the instruction to be mindful of the needs of others. which is a totally different way of looking at it, right? Totally different. And it also has the connotation, and this word also has the connotation of simply remembering. Remembering what happened, remembering what we did that worked, so we could do more of it, what's skillful, remembering what we did that didn't work, that was unskillful, so we don't do that going forward. So this remembering is a really, really important part of it. And again, all of these are elements.
What's the proper translation rather than incorrect?
Well, what's correct, what's incorrect? Because you've got to look at historical context as well.
I mean the translation from this British guy.
Yeah.
So the memory was part of that.
There's two different words, actually. I'm confusing two different words, because there's sati, which is mindfulness, which is the word that was translated as, because of the Anglican Book of Prayer. And then smrti more clearly has the connotation of remember, but there's a valence of remember. The two kind of overlap, and they're used not interchangeably, but they're both used in similar ways. And there is a valence of remembering in there. And all of these are flavors that are absent, completely absent, as far as I can tell, from this idea of just simple, bare awareness. So you're done. And this is saying, no, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot for us to work with. So where are we? And subduing, what was the phrase? Subduing greed and distress with reference to the world. So the there's the 6 sense gates. There's the 12 sense realms, the 6 sense gates, and the 6 objects of sense, and then there's the consciousness that shows up between the two of them. And this works kind of like the aggregates. We have the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, so forth. Those aren't a problem. That's just a description of saying, you're not what you think you are. Look at what you are, and you're made up of this stuff. That's a word, it's another unfortunate translation. It's a word that also translates to heap or trunk. But because it was done at a time when there were a bunch of engineers, they came up with aggregates, and they stuck with it. It's just not a great translation. So think of it as heap. You're just these 5 heaps of things that are kind of been stirred together. There's just nothing really to hold on to there. They become a problem when they move from being the 5 aggregates to being the 5 aggregates of clinging, which is how we relate to them. We start seeing ourselves as made up of these things, so we start getting caught up on them and tangling them together and creating identity around them. They become the 5 aggregates of clinging. The sense realms are really very similar. There's this idea of just seeing. Just seeing is, there's the story of Bahia, which I've told, I like using, and there are a couple of them, but Bahia was the guy, he was all the way across India somewhere, and he was feeling he needed some help, and somebody said, you should go see that Buddha guy, he kind of gets it. So he did, he tripped all the way across India, he found Buddha. Buddha was out there with his begging bowl, he asked him for help, and Buddha said, not now, because I'm begging. He asked him, and the 3rd time, the rule is, you gotta help. So Buddha said, okay. So he said, when there is seeing, there is just seeing. When there is hearing, there is just hearing, and so on. And he woke up. He got it. Because what that did, that instruction, it allowed him to see that he needed to clear all the clutter away. Just seeing means there is just the phenomenon of seeing. There's no thing being seen. There's no thing that's seeing. There's no noticeable event in between them. There is just the phenomenon of seeing. Like when you're sitting and a thought arises, you can just sit there. We can get caught up in the content of our thought. It becomes a story, because it becomes something that distracts and entangles us and spirals, papancha, right? Or we can just look at the thought as a phenomenon. There is a thought. I'm sure there is content in there. I'm sure it is a thought about something, but the about doesn't matter. It's just a thought. Let me see where it's coming from. And this is the phenomenon of origination. It's not just noticing that it's arisen, it's actually going back to see, where did it come from? What is the phenomenon of origination of that thought? Just a thought, no content, just a thought. Notice it arise, abide, and then see it cease. And what happens at cessation, the phenomenon of cessation. So this just seeing is kind of the same. There is a phenomenon of seeing. It's not me seeing, it's not something being seen. There is just a phenomenon that is within the sphere of my awareness, of my mindfulness. And so the senses themselves aren't the problem. The sense experience becomes a problem when we get caught in what in this canon are called the strings of sensuality, which are the things. It's like the of clinging. It means the same thing. The string of sensuality is the thing that pulls us in. So we get caught up in that sensual experience. We get caught up on what we then take to be sensual pleasure. That sensual experience isn't inherently pleasurable or unpleasant. If you can do it, and do it with not gross feelings of discomfort, but when you're sitting and your legs get uncomfortable, try just noticing that as a phenomenon not even in your leg. Try and just notice that as a phenomenon arising, as a feeling arising. Don't think of it as pain. It's just a feeling. Don't think about where it is. It's just feeling. And it becomes utterly discretionary what we do with it. We can call it pain, and oh my God, it can then hurt, and then it can get worse. We can say, that's actually quite pleasant. There's something warm there, there's something settling, there's something that is giving me some stability in my practice and putting just a little bit of an edge on the practice to keep me alert. There's lots we can do with it, but it's avoiding that string of sensuality. That string of sensuality is what pulls us in. So I do want to talk through the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati, and I also want to talk a little bit about the progression of mindfulness, because the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati both take different views, and I have come to the Satipatthana is much more straightforward in many ways. The Anapanasati is very, very rich. It's so simple and so superficial in some ways, but when you really get into it, it's so rich. And it is a really profound treatise on mindfulness, among other things. So I want to spend some time there. And then I also want to spend time looking at the cultivation or the evolution of mindfulness as we move down the path of our practice of mindfulness. But I have been talking for quite a while this evening. I'm certainly not going to get through all of that tonight. So I'm going to hold off on that, and we'll do all of that next week. And for now,